Hello, watchers and listeners. We're here with another episode of the Author Interview Plunge. This time we'll be interviewing Paul John Adams. Paul, originally from New York, is now based in Busan, South Korea, where he's been teaching English for the past 10 years. Paul writes about extreme psychopathology and gang warfare. I'm not sure what that is, but it sounds interesting. He believes in the universality of human struggle, with the occasional touch of gallows humor, and writes that he's lived well enough, but is neither blind nor forgetful. I'm not sure what that means, and I hope he'll tell us. Paul's most recent publication is in December 2017, To Fail with Flying Colors. It came out in both ebook and paperback, and links to that will be on our site. Please welcome Paul John Adams.
Hello, and pleased to meet you, and it's good to speak to you again, Joseph.
Yes, thank you so much. We're going to jump right into the questions. Are you ready, sir?
I am ready. Why not?
Very good. Tell us about your books. What books have you written?
All right. Well, the books I've got out now are, Meta Rules of the SMF. And that's my gang warfare novel. And basically, it is about culture built up from street level by a kind of neighborhood nascent gang building its strength, becoming a force, and the gang has their own rules. They have their own way of operating. They have their own honor code. It is a very violent book in a sense. They do have conflict with a lot of neighborhood gangs. They're car thieves. They're gamblers. They're out there fighting all the time. But I had the notion of writing a novel to lionize a hero of gang warfare, so that's what that is.
Okay, very good.
And my most recent book may be a little more convoluted to describe, To Fail with Flying Colors. It's the story of a kind of quack psychiatrist and his experimental methods. And it's really the story of 6 of his most notable patients, all of whom really exist on the fringe of extreme psychopathy in one form or another. Or not psychopathy, but psychopathology. I guess I should use the terms correctly. But maybe one of them would be fairly described as psychopathic, but the others have a variety of problems.
Okay, and this says nothing based on your personal history, I'm assuming.
No, I mean, there's nobody, thank God I'm not any of the characters in that book. But in another sense, maybe I am all of the characters in the book. I mean, that's just a writer's thing. I mean, you have to find sympathy and find a way to put yourself into each of them. So there's a lot of variety within the characters. Yet I can relate to each of them on some level.
Understood. We understand that you actually wrote a book many, many years ago and have put it into the ground with salted the ground and put garlic over it. Can you tell us a little about that book that will never see the light of day?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I guess there's not much to tell because I want to kill it. But, I mean, everybody starts somewhere, and you write something and see where it goes. And my first novel, I called it My Rotten Brain, and it was also about someone with mental issues. It was about a character who believes himself to be sort of imprisoned within his own body, not capable of making his own decisions, and therefore not responsible for anything that he does. So it's a kind of a defense mechanism. But let's say that maybe thinking about that led me to ideas that eventually became To Fail with Flying Colors. But the original novel in its original form was basically just something that I had to go through as a writer to be able to develop, but not something that I would want to share, so I decided to kill it.
Understood. Your actual history in writing is with screenwriting and script writing, isn't it?
That is correct. I studied film and television production. I wrote several feature-length screenplays and also shorts. I did participate in the production of a few short films and videos that I had written. And I had many production roles on feature films, low budget, kind of off the map films that I did not write. I didn't really have creative control in those. I've been writing for much of my life in the various media, but the novel is the one that's most interesting to me.
Understood. So your favorite writing project has been your novels.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's fair to say, although To Fail with Flying Colors, which just came out, is the most involved writing process I've been involved in, and I would call it a favorite. It really took a lot of dedication to get that thing written. I finished it before even setting out to start with SMF, but I decided to leave that on the shelf for a few years, write something else. So my books came out in reverse order from the order in which I completed them.
Okay, so what's the next project you have going? Do you have another project going?
I have, in a sense, two, but they're very sketchy. They're in like early development stage. I guess I'm kind of breaking a rule by talking about them, but why not? I mean, just my own rule. I don't try to talk them out too much because I don't want to get sick of my own ideas. But one of them is, in a sense, an exploration of legal process. It's about, it's basically a trial. I guess I should say it's somewhat absurdist. I may not have let on how much absurdity is in my other books as well. I mean, I can describe plot, but the flavor of it comes from reading the book. So, go ahead, please.
You sent me a sample of your next project. It was a trial. I found that a very fascinating read. I of course, having read it, do you have any experience in law?
I don't, no. It's just an interesting thing for me.
How do you research something like that then?
It's just very interesting to get a hold of actual court transcripts and read them.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They'll kind of blow your mind because the world is a strange place, and what goes on in a courtroom is pretty fascinating. I mean, I have witnessed courtrooms. I was burgled and was in the courtroom watching what goes on in the courtroom at that time. All I can say is a courtroom is a very strange place.
Okay, so we've gone from gang warfare and psychopathology to being in a courtroom. So here's the next question.
Sure.
You could change one thing in the world to make it a better place. What would it be?
I mean, that's a big question. So, I mean, idealistically, war is the most horrible thing that humanity has developed. I'd like to see the end of it. If there were such a thing as a world without war, that would be a pretty good world.
Definitely. I'm not sure what it would be like, but it would be an interesting place. What do you feel is the key to success?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for me, because, of course, success needs a definition. And one of the reasons that I called my book To Fail with Flying Colors is because I have more interest in people who have audacity or idealism, regardless of whether it leads to any kind of success. So actually, I don't have much respect for success. I mean,
really,
I'm not against success, but I'm not particularly in favor of it either. I think it's the struggle that's interesting.
Well, I do remember that in the preliminary information you sent me, you mentioned that you believe in the universality of human struggle, with the occasional touch of gallows humor. But you've made me curious now. You want your books to be successful, don't you? In the sense of read by a lot of people.
I mean, sure, why not? But I mean, this gets to, I I think maybe if you talk to different writers, they'll have very different perspectives on this. To me, I think, this might sound crazy, but I think that I, or perhaps many writers, could be considered like two people, not just a single person. So, I mean, the writer, the kind of, if you want to look at it as a kind of dualism, and there's the spiritual element and the vulgar body, right?
Mm-hmm.
The writer has absolutely no concern for pretty much anything except for the aesthetic of writing. And having writing read by an audience is fundamentally irrelevant to a writer, I think. The vulgar, the person who has to eat, the person who has to feed a family, and the person who has to look at himself in the mirror might like things like getting read or getting paid. But from a writer's perspective, those are pretty much irrelevant, I think.
Okay. Well, you mentioned having to feed a family. I know you have children. What would you like your legacy to be?
I guess I'll try to keep that within the realm of writing. So, yeah, to leave behind some good books. That's basically it.
Okay. Something which is read beyond the next 10 years, which goes on and touches people for generations to come?
I mean, that would be cool, sure. I mean, the thing is, of course, the people who have, inspired me are long dead writers.
Can you name a few of your inspirations?
Cervantes, there's millions of them. Dostoevsky, Celine, Italo Calvino, and older ones, Anonymous. Anonymous is my favorite author.
Yes.
Probably the author of Njal Saga. There's so many great works of the past. I love to read old books, so the older the better.
Yes, I had a professor who used to tell me, you have to read that great Greek historian Anonymous. And it was great because all the kids in the class are like, Anonymous, who's that? I never heard that guy. Yeah, right. But that's actually a pretty diverse bookshelf that you're describing. And I very much appreciate it.
I should say that I assume most writers are readers, right? So
yeah. Well, you have a few books on your shelf over there, so yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah. Mostly kids' books written in Korean, yeah. I don't know which one of this is, So, Koma Deji Naila. So, but yeah, my personal books are in the other room. But the thing is that most people who love to read soon recognize that the lifetime of one person is too short to catch up with all the great books there are out there.
Yes.
But the great thing is, each year or each couple of years, you can find some new personal savior, someone who's just amazing, and you can't imagine how could anyone be such a great writer. So maybe my most recent discovery for that would be Beckett. And of course, I'm not the first person to discover Beckett. So many have, but it's a discovery for me.
Well, you mentioned Calvino earlier, and I discovered Calvino probably 5 years ago. And it's been a book a year. But usually I will read the book several times over the course of the year, kind of like sucking it dry, like a dog with a bone. I'm sucking all the marrow out of it.
Nice.
Yes. Okay. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Again, within the world of writing and reading, I have many. One of them is the insistence that all books are ideology or politics, which I just think is absurd. There are people who can only view books through that lens, and that's about the reader, but that's not about the book. That's not about the writer. A book can be political. A book can have an ideology that can be the majority of a book's content, or it could be a very small angle on it, or it may be absolutely absent. So the insistence that we see everything as an ideology, I think, is ridiculous.
Well, that sounds to me like you're talking about an aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
well, I mean, what's the ideology of Don Quixote? Part of it might be we live in a corrupt world, but that might be the underlying message of the entire history of literature. But beyond that, I mean, Don Quixote, if you're not going to laugh your ass off at Sancho Panza vomiting in his master's face, then you haven't enjoyed the book. And that's not a political ideology. That's just the absurdity of the work. You have to experience.
And that was also life back then, very much. So,
Sure.
okay. What do you feel is your biggest accomplishment, both writing-wise and outside of writing?
The outside of writing is easier to say. It's my family. It's meeting my wife, getting married, and having our wonderful children. Anybody can make a family, but I'm very proud of mine.
Very good.
In writing, since again, I'm kind of idealistic about my writing. It's to have written to fail with flying colors and to be basically satisfied with it myself. Mm-hmm. To feel that I can never say that it meets all of my expectations. It doesn't, but I like it. I think it's pretty good.
So you would, let me know if this is a correct statement.
Okay.
You write primarily for yourself and then for others, as opposed to writing to an audience.
Yeah, definitely. If there's ever a question, should I go this way or that way? I have to trust my own judgment on that. I can't try to submit it to what would please an audience.
Right.
Or if I have an audience in mind, it would just be the people who I know personally who share my literary interests. And what I mean is I'm not even writing it for them. I just might, in some mind, think, how would a person who enjoys these books react to this? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think much about that anyway. But yeah, if I'm satisfied with it, then the job's done. That's basically it.
Well, I appreciate that you have to be satisfied with it before you send it out the door. I got that part. But if you write for yourself, I'm curious how you do your marketing. Or do you do marketing?
I guess when writing the book, there's no concern whatsoever for how people react to the book. And then when the book is done, you have something, and then you put on person number two, and person number two is like, well, what would somebody else like about this book? And let's just say that that's what this book is.
Okay.
I mean, just marketing is marketing. It's like if I picked up a book that somebody else wrote, how would I market it? It's no longer my book when I'm marketing it. It's just now I'm taking on the role of publisher or editor or whatever.
Right. In a way, it provides me another segue, because that to me seems like gambling, putting the book out there. And I know you've told me that at one point in your life you were a professional poker player.
Yeah.
So does that ever find its way, the mindset of a professional poker player, professional gambler, reading the odds, watching the people? You've talked about extreme psychopathology. My limited experience studying gang cultures has indicated to me that those people are phenomenally good at reading not only each other, but the situation, the environment. So does your history, because I don't know if you still are a professional poker player, but does your history doing that, studying that, does that find its way into your books?
Yeah, I would say sure. It doesn't have to, but I mean, again, and I keep holding on my books. Hey, but I mean, it's got a die on there. So these guys, their principal early operations as a gang is basically gambling cheats, you know. But of course, beyond that, they're gamblers in the sense of gamblers with life, you know, risk takers.
Mm-hmm.
Just maybe I have a sense of the life as like a series of turning points at which almost anything can happen, you know, that which doesn't mean that there's no way to play the game smart or no way to play the game stupid. There are probably many more ways to play it stupid than smart. Mm-hmm. I do think that thinking about things like games like poker or like chess, although I'm not a great chess player, anything that you can think deeply about can become a metaphor for other things and a way of processing your thoughts about things. So, actually, I was kind of thinking about this earlier, but I don't know where this would take us in the conversation.
Go ahead.
I tend to think of writing a book as a challenge, and if it's not a challenge, it's not interesting. So usually when I set out to write a book, I want to write a book that would be difficult for me to write, and have to find unique solutions on the spot without turning towards anything that's kind of like a pat solution or like a formula. So I think in a sense, every time you write a book, it's like an invention of literature. You're starting from scratch, from scratch. And the thing is, it's in some ways it's reinventing the wheel, which many people would call stupid because people have already invented the wheel. But you have to go through the process personally. You can't just inherit somebody else's ideas. And if I were to use an analogy from poker, if you want to learn a complex game like poker, you find out there are certain concepts which on their surface sound very simple. I don't know if have you played poker?
Poorly.
Okay. I mean, you know, if you were to try to learn how do you play poker well, one thing you learn is the importance of position, right? Position is like, where do you sit relative to the other players? I'm not talking about like superstitious things like who has the magic chair, but just like the person who's left of the dealer has to act first, and action progresses clockwise. Being able to act after other players means you're acting with more information, therefore power. So converting the power of position is extremely important in poker. Just being able to exploit your position relative to other players for information gathering purposes, for knowing how to attack individual players and so on is extremely important. And I can tell you that now, or you can read it in a book, but you can play for 3 years before you learn it. And it becomes your idea when you've put it into play. And I think writing is like that.
That is fascinating, and thank you for that. That's going to become a quote, I'm sure.
Oh, great.
Okay, so you've told us that when you write a book, you rediscover, you reinvent. So what did you find most useful in learning to write?
I think I learn it and then I forget it and then I relearn it, which is that the best ideas come while you're writing and not while you're planning necessarily. I do a lot of planning, but I have to recognize all planning is extremely sketchy and is going to be changed by the time you get down to the real thing. So ideally, I should be active in the writing process as much as possible. But on the other hand, I don't want to go crazy with it. I think some writers are grinders and they're just like insistent on putting a certain number of words on the page every day. I can't work that way.
Okay. So what was the least useful or most destructive thing you learned in writing? I guess having to put down a certain number of words every day.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that's harmful. And I think in terms of advice, if you were to survey all of the major writers who have given advice, that's probably the most universally shared one. Writers write.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't exactly object to it, but I just have to recognize that that's not a full solution. There are
Mm-hmm.
times when pushing yourself to get words out when they're not going to work out is not necessarily productive, but it's still 90% good advice. To me, anything that's really kind of in my nature, I'm a skeptic, so anything that is almost universally accepted as good advice, I tend to reject. So, show don't tell, those kinds of things. Anything that seems like an absolutist
Mm-hmm.
piece of advice. I mean, for instance, a project which I never followed through on, a screenwriting project. I've never written an adaptation of someone else's writing, and I thought I would, but somehow I couldn't do it. But I wanted to do an adaptation of a story called Michael Kohlhaas.
Okay.
And the story, in the story, someone tells a story. Okay, it's not a major. I'm not talking about Arabian Nights. The whole book isn't like that. But I just found myself thinking about a moment where someone comes and reveals something rather important, and in the story, it's presented as just the words that the guy tells when he sits down. We don't get anything in the way of description. We don't get any sense of being there or experiencing it with any of the characters. Now, in cinema, of course, everything's all about, what can you do in a cinematic way? How can you present it? This would almost automatically be presented as a flashback or that character's point of view. But I felt if I were going to write it for a film, I'd just have the dude come in and talk for 5 minutes and we'd just listen to it. Because it would be truer to the way the book was written. And I think that we don't have enough of that either. Sometimes tell and don't show. Sometimes you just have to do that. I don't know.
Yes, I agree with that. So you have this kind of different, I'm not going to say 180-degree variant of the normal writing process. You have a different writing process, which is working for you. So let's switch to what goes on inside the books.
Okay.
In your books, you have 2 books out. You're working on a courtroom drama. You have a book that you're gonna kill at some point.
Right.
If you could spend time with a character from any of your books, you get to spend time with them for a day. Who would the character be, and what would you guys do?
Well, I did find myself thinking back a little bit to meta rules of the SMF because, my books so far have many characters and many situations that develop in them. I mean, there's many named characters in each of the books. So I found myself thinking about which are the characters that I particularly like, in a sense. And in meta rules, of course, there's the protagonist, Malafa, and the gang leader, Jonas. But one guy who comes in quite late into the book and is not exactly a central character, a guy named Calvin Trice. He is the leader of another gang, and he's a really devious guy. And he's almost sort of like a role model for Jonas. He's the older, more experienced, and more corrupt character, but he's a very interesting character. I mean, somehow I found when I wrote him, like, wow, I really like Calvin Trice as a character.
Give me the deceptive kind of guy, the gang leader person. That's who you want to spend time with.
That's right. Yeah, maybe
Okay.
maybe pick his brain, find out what he has to tell me.
Yeah, but don't get him engaged in a game of poker, though.
Right. We'd be drinking our Lefroy Godfathers. We'd be having our nice cocktails at the bar. Yes. And basically scheming. Yeah.
Okay, so you've had this meeting with these gang leaders and mischievous, deceivious guys, and now you've gone home and they're on the street corner. What are they saying about you?
That guy's a freak.
Okay, alrighty.
Yeah, I don't know, but
No,
they may not relate so well to me, even if I relate to them.
Okay, last question. We're coming up on the close.
Sure.
If you could have been the author of any book ever written, now you listed quite a few authors when I asked you previously about, your influences and stuff. And we both talked about Calvino, and you talked about Cervantes, and Anonymous, the great Greek author.
Yeah.
Actually, he got around. He was all over the place. But if you could have been the author of any book ever written, which book would it be? And tell me something as that author.
Ooh. I mean, I almost feel like I should pick something that I haven't talked about before. So, I mean, one book that I could go to would be Gargantua and Pantagruel by Francois Rabelais. And it's very silly. It's a very absurd book. It's about giants and their bizarre adventures.
Really? I've never heard of this one. This is great.
Oh, yeah, you've got to get a hold of it. I mean, we have the word gargantuan, which comes straight from a character, Gargantua, in Rabelais' book. And actually, Rabelais' name does become a word in our dictionary, Rabelaisian, which basically means vulgar.
My kind of guy.
Yeah.
That's the guy who I'd be with on the street. Yeah.
So his advice for us is basically to do what you want and get drunk.
So
but I don't live that life. It's funny. I'm a pretty sober guy. But if I have to be Rabelais for a day and channel the voice of Rabelais, don't wait to get thirsty before drinking. Drink to put off the thirst.
Oh, I like that. That's going to be another quote. That'll be another quote in the interview. Okay. Any final comments? Any parting words?
Let's see. Sometimes I've been kicking around some quotations from, I don't know why it's been influential on me. Tsunetomo is a Japanese author who wrote The Way of the Samurai, or Hagakure. And he says, let's see, can I conjure up the quote? Basically, the solution to everything is to become insane and desperate.
You're talking now about business people I've known. Very good, sir. I want to thank you, Paul John Adams, the author of books, including, not to be limited to, the meta rules of
the SMF.
And To Fail with Flying Colors. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Hope we can chat again sometime.
Definitely. Take care and talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, goodbye.